It's exciting to arrive in Darwin. The top end of Australia is a fascinating birding destination with an amazing diversity of habitats, containing over 300 bird species, including 95 Australian endemics. From the airport, straight to Darwin Esplanade, and a view of the large, elegant Teresian imperial pigeon. And a pair of shimmering blue forest kingfishers, the female with incomplete white collar, which goes right around in the male. Figbird is one of the most common species in this landscaped urban environment, with the brightly coloured golden male in striking contrast to the brown striped female. As usual, masked lapwing doesn't hold back in expressing its displeasure at our presence. This beautiful, tranquil harbour was the scene of terrible aerial bombardments in World War II, with tragic loss of life. Here's a small party of charismatic little double-barred finches with their owl-like faces, one of the most common of the top-end finches. They're regular ground feeders, widespread in various habitats. This northern subspecies has an all-black rump, distinguishing it from the white-rumped eastern race. Barking owls prefer peripheral habitats and often occur in pairs, so the water's edge is a good place to find this aptly named mid-sized ninox owl. We're visiting nearby Doctor's Gully, an expansive mudflat at low tide with a patch of monsoon rainforest along a small stream running into the sea. Difficult to spot on its habitual high perch is the entirely arboreal Australasian yellow oriole, also known as the green oriole. Mostly a fruit eater and a fierce defender of good food sources, it's usually heard singing incessantly long before it can be spotted. Herons are foraging on the tidal flats. Striated heron, small and stocky, stalks along stealthily, searching for mud skippers, fish and invertebrates. Another stalker is the exclusively coastal eastern reef egret. This is the grey morph. This species also occurs in a pure white morph. The next morning, we're driving up to Lee Point, the northernmost tip of the Darwin area. It's a good spot for terns and large numbers of shorebirds. An abundant and a confiding ground feeder, peaceful dove is common over a wide area of Australia, while the much larger bar-shouldered dove in the same family has a less extensive range, preferring more coastal habitats. Lorikeets are small, brightly coloured parrots adapted to live on nectar, pollen and small fruits. They also take flowers and insects. Red-collared lorikeet is restricted to northern Australia, where they're locally abundant in noisy, belligerent flocks and have taken advantage of human modifications of the natural environment, as has their close relative rainbow lorikeet, found throughout the rest of the country and now the most abundant bird species in Australia. Eastern cole is a summer migrant from New Guinea and Indonesia. A parasitic cuckoo which breeds in Australia, it seeks large nests in which to lay. When this juvenile wasn't gorging itself, it was harassing its unfortunate surrogate parents, a family of grey-crowned babblers, who were frantically foraging on the ground below to keep up with its exhausting demands and constant stressful calls. Babblers are intensely social, living in groups of 6 to 20, maybe just enough to cope with this nestling turned aggressive giant. Greenback gerygone is a tiny flitting bird found only in the top end, which spends most of its time foraging high in the canopy. It's best located by its rapid, high-pitched reeling song, which is one way of differentiating it from the similar large-billed gerygone. There are waders on the beach and a familiar call to check out on the way. That repetitive sequence of loud, clear notes is the call of striated pardalote in breeding season, and a pair has made its nest inside a tunnel in the sandbank. Several different races of this species are found Australia-wide. This is the northern black-capped race. Australia's only bee-eater, rainbow bee-eater, also breeds in tunnels burrowed into sandy embankments. It feeds by swooping from a perch in a dazzling colourful arc to take insects on the wing, and prefers communal feeding and nesting. The waders have flown in, but need to be approached slowly and cautiously on this open beach. These newly arrived migratory waders are in non-breeding plumage, although there are remnants of breeding plumage still on some birds. There's a wonderful assortment of tern species as well, great for comparison purposes. Buffalo Creek is our next site, and we've timed it for low tide to give us the best chance of seeing Chestnut Rail, an iconic and difficult to see top-end species. But first we have to park the car, and are delighted to observe birds which are attracted by an incidental water source from the kiosk air conditioner. Another interested observer on this extremely hot day, the largest Australian butcherbird. Look at the hook on that beak. Also considering whether to hop through for a drink is grey whistler, a very small whistler which looks and behaves more like a flycatcher. We've torn ourselves away from the attractions of the car park to the river's edge and the mangroves, and we've spotted the most widespread of Australia's kingfishers, the sacred, which got its name from the belief of the Polynesians that it could control the waters. There's that beak again. Well covered in mosquito repellent, we've settled in for a vigil, looking across to the opposite bank in search of Chestnut Rail. There's plenty of life to observe in these mangroves. Yellow white-eye is the most common bird, foraging in small trilling flocks through the foliage. And that's the call of another, much larger kingfisher, the collared kingfisher. Plenty of food here for a generalist carnivore like the strikingly coloured Brahminy kite, which perches conspicuously before gliding down the river to snatch up a meal. Despite these distractions, we're staying vigilant by constantly scanning the riverbank. And at last, a rail is appearing from behind the mangrove roots, with its chick too. They feed any time of the day or night, depending on the tides, foraging for marine invertebrates in well-defined territories, which they vigorously defend. The Northern Territory adult is an unusually large rail with rich chestnut colouring and a grey head. The more westerly population has more olive grey upper parts. Poor flyers, but fast runners, they are very wary and can quickly disappear back into the tangled forest of mangrove roots if disturbed. We've been keeping so still that this common sandpiper has walked in front of us, practically over our feet. And meanwhile, one of the adult rails has ventured right down to the water to bathe. But the chick is more cautious, wisely so, as there is only a single brood of 4 to 6 eggs a year, and maybe it's the only survivor. Even the adult has decided bath time is over, and it's time to retreat to the safety of the mangroves. Which leaves us to negotiate our way back through the mangroves, though with a little less speed and agility. Next morning, after a post-mangrove-itchy night, we're going to explore more of the different habitats of Casuarina Coastal Reserve. Oh no, we're starting with mangroves again, but they are such life-nourishing areas and made somewhat more inviting by the sweetly melodious call of the mangrove gerygone. Aha! We've emerged from mangroves to some drier bushland and spotted a brush cuckoo, uncharacteristically quiet, but only because it's consuming its favourite meal of caterpillar. As soon as that's swallowed, it's back to its incessant, penetrating breeding season call, which can rise to a frenzied crescendo. This bird wants to be noticed. We've been chasing a small flock of varied lorikeet, which exploded out of some nearby flowering melaleucas and has now briefly settled. It's usually difficult to see these nomadic feeders who zip around giving high-pitched screeches, then clamber nimbly through foliage gorging on nectar, but now we can see their gorgeous colouring and the diagnostic white eye ring. Yep. A good one. Sand goanna is the most widespread of Australian goannas with extremely varied colouring. Like all monitors, it's carnivorous, consuming almost anything that can be caught and eaten, and it can move very rapidly. The university grounds offer various habitats and plenty of seeds for these beautifully elegant long-tailed finches with orange beaks and black throats. The Western Australian subspecies has a yellow beak. Specific waterside habitats with flowering paperbark are required for bar-breasted honeyeater. The nest is built from strips of paperbark overhanging the water, closely resembling flood debris. It feeds on insects gleaned from the foliage or in flight, as well as nectar. Swampland's lashtail is a slender, long-tailed lizard, very similar to Gilbert's dragon and a much smaller reptile than the goanna. At nearby Rapid Creek, we're surprised to see a single sulphur-crested cockatoo coming down to drink. We're more used to seeing noisy, screeching flocks. and afterwards we're treated to a wonderful display of his crest. From large to tiny, golden-headed cisticola can be found in waterside vegetation down the eastern coastal areas of Australia. It can be located by its buzzing and whistling calls and the soaring display flights of males. Mangroves again, and always the thought of crocs. So instead of venturing too far in, we're trying to get the birds to come out. Lemon-bellied flycatcher has obliged. This small flycatcher with its pretty bubbling song makes the smallest nest of any Australian bird. Just along the river, a larger nest is being built by a pair of those beautiful, subtly coloured, sleek, long-tailed finches. Because of the seed-eaters' frequent need to drink, they prefer habitat near watercourses and have selected just such a site. Largely sedentary, this may not be the first time that this pair has built here. There certainly seems to be plenty of material available for a satisfactory nest with soft lining, and they are taking great care with it. Another flycatcher. We particularly love this mosquito-eating paperback flycatcher, the tropical equivalent of the restless flycatcher, though the similar strange grinding call is less frequently used. The white-gaped is one of the most common honeyeaters around Darwin, often present in gardens where it's noisy and aggressive in defending food sources. Continuing along the coast to Nightcliff, the tide is well out and we're able to explore the exposed mangroves. Here's another flycatcher, broad-billed flycatcher. Both male and female are similar in appearance to the female leaden flycatcher, which also occurs in this habitat, but the broad-billed has a more uniform, rich buff upper breast than the leaden, and the bill is slightly broader, as the name suggests. A very careful scan of the area is not revealing any other birds. But wait, a master of camouflage is present. There are two cryptically coloured bushstone curlews standing stationary to avoid detection, which they nearly did. They're widespread and common, often standing like garden statues in the green areas of the CBD itself, and coming to life at night with unearthly screeching. Much easier to detect is this grey-tailed tattler, a summer migrant from Siberia, and even its fellow migrant ruddy turnstone is easily seen on a rock, rather than being camouflaged scavenging in seaweed. At East Point, we have at last found one of the mangrove honeyeaters, the red-headed, a tiny bird with a brilliant red head and rump, active and alert with a swift darting flight and a long bill. Colvass Road is adjacent East Point Reserve and features a different habitat suitable for the ubiquitous brown honeyeater and a flock of white-breasted wood swallow, Australia's largest wood swallow and the most common on or near the coast. They love to huddle together on power lines and branches, and this flock is settling in to roost for the evening. A large honeyeater, little friarbird, is not so easily scared off. And down among the waving stalks of grass there are finches feeding on the seeds. It's a flock of chestnut-breasted manakins, a common top-end finch, comprising adults with boldly marked broad chestnut and white bellies, and juveniles in drab, almost uniform brown plumage. The birds breed in colonies, nesting close together, and there is constant contact chatter. Above is whistling kite, a widespread species in Australia except in arid areas. It's an opportunistic hunter and scavenger, eating a range of small animals and often robbing other birds of prey. Red-winged parrots inhabit a large area of northeast Australia in wooded habitat accessible to water. The males have stunning scarlet wings contrasting with mainly green bodies. Adjacent to the CBD and with a variety of habitats, Darwin's botanical gardens are a must-see for birders. Straw-necked ibis is using its extremely long beak to probe the wet grass for whatever turns up. Smallest of the three Australian megapodes, the mound builders, orange-footed scrubfowl spends most of its time scraping for food on the ground, although it can fly in short, clumsy bursts. Pandanus, a prickly palm-like tree usually surrounding water, is the favoured habitat of the beautiful blood-red crimson finch. The top-end race has a black belly, while the belly of the Cape York race is white. Look down carefully for droppings and very high up into the fig trees at the Botanic Gardens to try to spot rufous owl, Australia's largest. This other nocturnal species, tawny frogmouse, should have chosen an equally sheltered high position where attacks by honeyeaters wouldn't be keeping it wide-eyed and awake. It should be just starting to wake up now, as the tropical sun sinks rapidly into the sea and another day ends in this wonderful birding area.